Welcome, Denise.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I think today we could start with something that I know is unfortunately a hot topic, and that's the mother-daughter relationship when it comes to this feeling of not being seen or having an inside emotional life and not being able to connect that relationally to a mom. How does that impact a child and then, of course, the adult?
This is such an important topic because I started posting about this and did not, even though it shows up so much in my practice, I did not realize how much this was going to resonate with people. And I think that speaks volumes about even outside the mother-daughter relationship for sons as well. It's that importance of that early attachment experience. And so much of our attachment experience is obviously tied to our sense of self, our nervous system regulation, the way we learn to go on to see relationships. But at the core of it, being seen for a child is pretty much equivalent to being loved. Because if you are seen, and not just in the physical sense, right, the emotional sense as well, like who you are as a person, the emotions you're experiencing in the moment, um, when we have that experience, it makes us feel loved. And to feel loved, especially as a small child who's completely dependent on a parent, is equivalent to our survival. So for us to not feel seen can almost feel like this internal death in a way, because we don't have somebody there mirroring back our experience. And it's really remarkable to think that it really can start that early for so many of us. Of course, other people can have this experience with different experiences in their lives where they're unseen, or it's not safe to be seen for parts of their identity or who they are. But for so many of us, it does start in our early attachment experiences. And what's remarkable is the way that unconsciously we figure out how to present some version of ourselves that parent, especially if it's our mother, is going to accept or to love, which is so incredibly brilliant and skillful to figure out how to get our attachment needs met. So that's really wonderful. Of course, through our childhood, for most of us, we end up staying stuck in that. So when that starts to unfold in childhood, we're presenting this version of ourselves. Maybe it's like the caretaker, the people pleaser, the self-abandoner, the good kid, right? Like always working hard to make sure everyone's happy, getting good grades. You might become very perfectionistic, overachieving, all the things that so many of us struggle with, and especially as women are often praised for, even, I would say. But what happens is we find our way into adulthood, and oftentimes we don't have a sense of who we are, or we're finding our relationships aren't reciprocal, or we carry a lot of resentment, our needs aren't met, or we just feel like we keep continuing these patterns where like no one really knows us in our relationships. So it ends up staying with us because it started for our survival, but we carry it with us because we never learned or had the experience of it being safe to be who we are. And in fact, so many of us don't actually know that person when this starts so early.
Oh, there's so much there. It struck me when you said that our bodies will do what it needs to do to get that attachment. And that might mean being quiet or staying out of the way even, or being the funny one, or being this, like I was, the therapist at a very, very young age, and managing the emotional life of them and them liking it. All kinds of things develop. And I think it is brilliant to see it in that way, that, wow, we figured out a way it's related to survival. We did what we had to do to have some sort of connection and for our safety. But then it carries over. And I don't think we realize that until we realize that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would, on one hand, I would, for so many people, this would be a trauma unto itself, right? To go through childhood being completely unseen. For other people, you might even throw traumas on top of that experience.
Yes.
Which is a whole other isolating experience, because on some level, you as a child already know that it's not safe to be who you are, to be authentic, let alone to share something that may have happened to you or someone may have done to you. And I think this just keeps us so stuck in these shame spirals about keeping things in, keeping things suppressed, keeping things even from ourselves to some extent, when there's no safety around us. And I see this especially in families where the parent, mother in particular, is very emotionally immature or narcissistic, because the moment that child starts to express themselves, right, which, kids who have to learn this, I think maintain it pretty well, sort of up until adolescence. Yeah. When it becomes like this natural part of yourself that is pushing boundaries, is trying to assert yourself and be more autonomous. The second that child in some way starts to drop some of that presentation, it's like a whole different experience with that, right? The shaming, the criticism, the punishment, the silent treatment, whatever might come from that. Because suddenly you're breaking this agreement that you've had that's like, I will love you as long as. And that conditional love piece, I think for so many of us, is also tied to this fear of abandonment, right? Because it's, we can talk in our heads about, the risk to be vulnerable and showing parts of yourself, and we can understand that cognitively. But if you've had the lived experience of the most important person in your life punishing you, harming you, walking away from you, leaving you alone, physically or emotionally, when you show some sliver of authenticity, that fear of abandonment is not just cognitive, it is like visceral.
Yeah.
That fear of being left alone.
Yeah.
So it's like it has all these arms that go into all these different areas of our lives.
It's interesting that what you're saying, because I, as you were speaking, I had this memory of me, and it never really made sense, but in a way it does. My own mom was very unsafe to be around. And yet I can remember being in the grocery store as a child and not finding her for a moment and panicking. She was the scariest person around. But again, I think that's that biological system that's like, yeah, but I have to connect with her because my biology says I need her to be safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What you just said is so important, Monique. I need her to be safe, right?
Yeah.
There's so many pieces to this, but what's coming to mind is the ways that our minds and bodies kind of reshape reality as children because we need them to be safe.
Yes. Yeah.
You have a parent who's unsafe, who's punishing, shaming, rejecting, all of these things. You as a child, one, just our cognitive capacities at that point, and children are very egocentric in how they see the world, meaning they put themselves at the center of everything. They're the cause of everything. So you pair that with a child who biologically needs that parent to be safe. Then anytime you are mistreated, it's not them, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong. I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where we start to see like those lifelong beliefs that can really heavily impact our lives, our self, our relationships, what we do out in the world, when we don't check these things, because we just take those beliefs as they were formed, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Very young.
Yes, very young.
Being reinforced over and over. And we might be adults walking around in adult bodies, but we're carrying the beliefs of like a very little version of ourselves that was reinforced over and over, and probably got reinforced into adulthood if we were in relationships that mirrored some of those dynamics.
Yes. Yes. So talking about not being seen in a deep way and then feeling alone or isolated because we don't have that connection. And then what does that create inside our bodies?
I'm glad you asked that. I think for so many of us, we're actually disconnected from our bodies. You know, part of how a child gets seen and validated for their experience in the reality is through our emotional experience, right? Our emotional expression. And where do your emotions live? In your body. So if that's the thing we're having to disconnect from in order to make our parents safe or to stay connected to them, we are in some way disconnecting from the body in some way. And I think that's so much of the time why many of us don't even notice that something really starts to break down, that all these things are under the surface because we live neck up and we live in a world that really values intellect and thinking and controlling and fixing and processing rather than slowness and connection. So I think inherently it requires you to disconnect on some level. And I think often this is why we see folks struggling with even chronic pain, chronic health issues, because it's our body's way of, one, carrying what's been suppressed, but also perhaps even a part of it trying to pull for our attention to come back to ourselves.
Interesting. I was thinking also it has to go somewhere, that energy. It has to go somewhere, you know? I've shared this before, but when I was going through a lot of stress to a 10 as a child and teenager and things happening, I remember I suddenly developed different kinds of hives. And I would just my lip would blow up. I had to get my ring cut off. Like they'd be like melons. Well, my lip was a melon. My fingers were huge. My feet would be they would just blow up and didn't know why, had no idea. My body had so much that it had to suppress. So it was coming out in some way. So I think that's really true.
When you suppress something, it doesn't just go away.
No. I'm thinking of a balloon, right? Like a ball that you put in the water. Right? And you're pushing it down, but then whoop, it comes up.
How much energy that takes. And that's the interesting thing, even just physiologically, because, right, if you're thinking about the strength and the muscle activation that it takes to literally hold that beach ball under the water, that's what's happening internally for us. Like we're actually activating or keeping our fight or flight system activated by suppressing all of that.
Wow.
So it might be peaceful outside of us, right? Because we didn't say the thing. We didn't say no. We didn't ask for something. We didn't express ourselves. But inside, there's like this storm brewing inside your body, just trying to hold down whatever it is that we're suppressing or abandoning within ourselves. And that's part of that connection to like inflammation and disease is like if your body's in a chronic state of activation, we're not in that rest and digest healing place.
Yeah.
We're more prone to develop illnesses because of that and release of all those hormones. Yeah. So I was just at a conference yesterday, beautiful event with Gabor Mate and Kimberly Shannon Murphy that was all about return to self. So many of the things we're talking about. And Gabor's famous for talking about this connection with his book, The Body Says No, which is all about this experience of what happens inside of us when we suppress our needs and the connection with illness. And what he talks about is there's sort of a profile of people with chronic illnesses and autoimmune disease, not to make huge generalizations here, but the people who are people pleasers, what you can't say no to and how that manifests in your body. So all of us to some degree who may have had these experiences in our early attachment relationships. And that's, this is not I always want to be clear about this. This is not pointing fingers and blaming parents. This is about looking really honestly and clearly at what our circumstances and relationships were and are and how it impacted you and how that's showing up today. Because we are impacted by each other. We are social beings. Like our nervous systems are influenced by each other, even into adulthood. So if these are experiences that you've had, it is really important to take a look and understand, like, to what extent did I feel safe as a child, emotionally and physically? What parts of myself have I had to hide? What parts of myself am I still hiding? Is it in my relationships? Is it in my work and my career? Is it like my gifts that I'm hiding? can show up in so many different ways.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I was actually having a talk with someone yesterday about this. And I said, it's not just a mindset like, oh, I'm aware now. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's true. It has impacted me. And I'll be different next time because I'll use my voice. It is so much deeper because then it gets wired into our survival, and our bodies have learned that even though up here we might know, well, you know what, we could use our voice. When we start to use our voice, our nervous system's like, whoa, wait a minute. It is not safe. We remember what it was like. And so we get all these physical sensations of like, don't do it. And it's really to protect us. But we start thinking, what's wrong with us? Why am I so anxious? Why aren't I doing it? When it's our body again going, it wasn't safe. It's not safe.
Exactly. And it's one of the impacts of trauma is that it makes it very difficult for us to see the here and now clearly, just as it is.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Even if cognitively you're showing up in the here and now, your body and your nervous system are remembering. And they're, that's what the brain and body are supposed to do. They're supposed to take past experience and, best plan for what's happening now based on what you've experienced before. But when those have been your experiences, and that's bumping up against the reality of this moment, it makes it really hard for us to have that freedom of choice that we might feel like we have cognitively through that awareness. So, this brings to a really important point, like to work with this stuff. Yes, there is some cognitive work sometimes, but so much of it is connecting back with whether you want to talk about it as connecting with your nervous system and your body. To me, they're one and the same, or connecting with these younger parts of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what's being encapsulated in your body.
Yeah.
This is what's so amazing to me about somatic work and inner child work. The body has wisdom beyond what we can even understand at this point scientifically. But those memories that you experience, especially when they're repeated over and over, and that's important too. Like, we're not talking about one-offs here. Our system, the attachment system, is so amazing. It was built to handle ruptures as long as there's repairs.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about is when there's like chronic ruptures without any repair here. So just for people to keep in mind, because we are all imperfect human beings and imperfect parents. So this isn't about like, my mother wasn't perfect. This is about chronic, repeated attachment failures. But it's amazing that when we have those experiences, they almost get saved, like fossilized, perfectly preserved. And that's why, when people talk about emotional flashbacks, different than a visual flashback that we might have in PTSD, but that's like where you're taken right back to that feeling state. And for this, we're talking about that lack of safety, that fear, that anticipation, and how all that manifests for us in the here and now is hypervigilance, constantly, like scanning, aware. Mm-hmm. But it shows up to the same intensity practically as when we first experienced that. Mm-hmm. And that's why it is so difficult to move through that if you're just working from up here. So It's not a matter of you not being smart enough. It's not a matter of you not trying hard enough, not a matter of you being weak or not strong enough. It's because there's another part of yourself that needs to be connected with to navigate through that, to help you feel safe enough to be willing to do those.
I'm shaking my head too, because I'm so grateful that this information is here now. But I remember when I was a young mom and I was going for help, and we didn't have this information. And I was told to write out like the truth or the positive. So in other words, by writing out the truth, oh, you're capable and you're strong, and write out the truth, that somehow is going to change. And I would come back and say, it didn't really do anything. And they would look at me like, almost like you're not trying hard enough, or you got to keep trying. And it's like, so I'm so grateful that we now understand that this is more than just our thinking patterns. Yes, our thinking pattern is impacted by our physiology. And so, the idea of safety. I was going to say something though, back to what you were saying earlier with immature emotionally. It's just such a nice way to say something else, to say an emotionally immature parent, but that is what it is. It's like they've been stunted somewhere in their emotional growth. When you were talking about a child being egocentric, it's like they kind of stop there.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's why this is often a generational pattern.
Mm-hmm.
The child doesn't get stuck there for no reason.
Yes, yes. And that's what makes it so challenging, I find, with healing this. We can work on ourselves and work on safety and help ourselves to grow, but hoping that our relationships will be different with our emotionally immature parent. I know we always want to have hope. I think we also need to be realistic as well.
Falls into different categories.
Yeah.
I think almost about 3 categories, though you could make it 2. One category might be parents who they have their own unresolved issues, really doing the best they could. And you could argue, no matter what, a person is doing the best they could. But a parent who has willingness and some capacity for empathy, that is a different category.
Yes.
Those are relationships where that hope is very beneficial. Those conversations can be had. They may not change right away, but there's openness and willingness. And that's really important because that's wildly different than the other category that I will lump together, which is emotionally immature parents and narcissistic. Because that lack of empathy being core to both those things is what prevents someone from seeing you. You cannot, if you lack empathy, you lack perspective taking, you literally cannot put yourself in someone else's shoes. And that is a prerequisite to help someone else feel seen. So I do think of those 2 things as existing along the same spectrum, emotionally immature. And as it increases in severity, we go to narcissism. And this is what makes this like journey to yourself, towards authenticity, towards using your voice, so much trickier is if your parent or parents, which sometimes is the case, are in that second category. You're not just talking about a singular individual. You're talking about a whole system of dysfunction that when, this often is what's happening in adulthood, is when you're starting to do this healing work and you're reconnecting to your body, you're maybe starting to validate your feelings or your gut feelings, or like, oh, I didn't like how that felt. I'm going to say something, or I'll say no to this. You start setting boundaries. You don't just have pushback from that one individual. You have pushback from a whole system. And something Gabor said yesterday really struck me that I want to share is, he said, there may be no pain-free option. Like this choice between self-abandonment and authenticity.
Can you say that again?
There may be no pain-free option.
Yeah.
It is not the easiest path to choose yourself, choose your authenticity, your voice, your experience, your truth, especially if you're in a sick system. Because to do that, the more you speak up, the more denial, scapegoating, blame, all of that is going to show up. So a child then, even an adult child, is back at making that choice of like, am I choosing myself or am I choosing to stay connected to these people? And I'm not necessarily even talking about someone going no contact, but just like what level of contact or degree of have those family members. And that's incredibly painful to be able to make that choice.
And especially those of us in that category have learned, whether it was told to your face or whether it was a message that somehow you got, and that is somehow by you doing this, you are being selfish. That's a big one I hear all the time. I've experienced those feelings. We got that message that by putting our care or our needs above, we are being self-centered.
Have you heard the phrase, whatever somebody who's narcissistic accuses you of, they themselves are doing? And
that's so true.
Right? I mean, think about that battle. If your parents in that neighborhood, even, right? Even with traits where everything is about them and how you become parentified as a result of that, like their emotions, keeping them regulated, everything is about them. So if you try to take up any space with any of your own stuff, it does feel very selfish to them. How dare you take up my air? How dare you take up?
Yes.
But that's that shame that gets reinforced so early on, is like, I'm bad. I'm doing something wrong by being myself or taking up some sort of space for myself.
Yes.
And more than that, it's almost framed as like a betrayal. If you're making a choice between yourself and your attachments and you're choosing yourself, you're betraying us. Betraying us. And I mean, again, we go back to biology, like we're biologically hardwired to be connected, especially to our, and it puts like such an internal dilemma within us, which it makes sense why, like if you're stuck in this, even if you know these things and you're stuck in this dilemma right now, it makes so much sense because it's an incredibly challenging place to be. And I love that Gabor put words to that. Like, I don't know if there is a pain-free option.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how the hope is always that they're going to get it. They're going to see the light. They're going to have some form of remorse. I like what he said. There might not be a pain-free solution.
But one comes with freedom. That's the difference.
Yes. Yeah, is the freedom. So
it also goes back to the hope you were just talking about. But instead of putting that hope on this person who keeps showing us who they are, keeps doing the same thing over and over again, keeps hurting us, when we keep that hope on them to change, that things will be different. And I know, of course, again, if we're talking about narcissistic parents, that's extra complicated because sometimes they will show us they will be different as part of that cycle, but ultimately it repeats. But it's letting go of that hope because we put our lives on hold waiting for that person to change, right? How many of us can have had that experience where it's like, I will feel whole, I will feel good enough, I will feel like I can move forward when this person apologizes, takes accountability, owns it, says sorry, whatever it might be. So we're literally stuck on hold waiting for that while life is happening. So I think what you're saying is so important, Monique, because it is putting that hope on yourself. Like, what is it that I want to create in my own life? Like, I actually have the capacity to have choice in my relationships, who I choose to have around me that feels safe, that feels supportive, that allows me to be my authentic self. And that's really hard, right? I know we're saying this like, you just do this, but like there's a ton of grief that comes with that process. And it's not a straight line at all. It comes and goes and ebbs and flows. And anger along with that, right? About so many different layers of this experience. But ultimately that freedom is in putting that hope on yourself in your own life.
yes. Yeah, there is a part of myself that has felt they don't have the capacity to see outside of themselves, but I do. That doesn't give them the right to cause me emotional harm.
Compassion doesn't mean access.
Yes. Good. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is important to hold space for that, especially when you can see that it is generational. What was done to them impacted how they are, their capacities, how they show up, maybe even their own narcissism, their emotion regulation. All of that can be true, while it can also be true that this person, like being close to this person, is harming me.
Yes.
And that is something that is hard to hold both of those things, especially if you've internalized all those messages that you're selfish or wrong for doing that. Because I think for so many of us, when we validate our pain, we think it cancels out all the other stuff, right? It must mean that I don't love them or this or that, right? Like we really don't have the capacity to hold that dialectic. It takes a lot of practice.
Yes.
But two things can be true. And you will never hear that from that family member or that family system, because a family that's that dysfunctional is black and white.
You took it out of my mouth. Black and white. There's no gray. It's they hate you or they love you. There's no.
Two things cannot be true to some in that way.
Yeah.
Only to us as we go through our.
Yeah. And I love that because what I heard you say is just like that reminder that we can still have compassion and for the first time, maybe have some compassion on ourselves by saying, I need to feel okay too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If we can have compassion for them and how they to have these limited capacities, we absolutely need to have compassion for ourselves. And compassion isn't just, the kind, soothing way we might relate to ourselves. Sometimes it's like fierce mama bear self-compassion. Active self-compassion. I love you so much. I won't let this person hurt you.
And I'm something when you said that, because I was thinking about it before when you were talking. I'm a mom, you're a mom. And I know if this was happening to my daughters, I would say, take care of yourself, protect yourself. You deserve it. You deserve it, sweetheart. Oh, it feels foreign to kind of say it to ourselves at first, but when you think of it in your own child, what you would tell them if they were in this situation, say, yeah.
What would you tell somebody you love, whether it's a child or a friend or a loved one, if you don't have children and can't connect to that? Asking yourself, am I treating myself like somebody that I love? Most of us are not. Like most of us, we are so skilled at giving our compassion and warmth and empathy to other people, but for some reason it doesn't apply to us. And we can come up with a laundry list of why we're the bad apple, why we don't deserve it. And that is the proof of your attachment experiences right there.
Right there. Yeah. So before we end this amazing conversation, and I'm going to have you back, tell us about the work that you do, because it's related to this, and I just think it's wonderful.
It is. I have developed a program that's available to folks wherever they are in the world. And that's a live group program called Heal the Inner Child. And this is an integrative program that includes self-compassion work, attachment work, kind of some embodied and mindfulness work, and parts work to connect with and heal with all these really like suppressed parts of ourselves, all these parts that we've abandoned, and yet are still driving the bus for so many of us in different ways in our lives. So this program has pre-recorded video modules that you can move through at your own pace throughout the 6 months that the program goes on. You have audio meditations, a workbook to kind of deepen your experience, because we know that this work is like in the small moments of our everyday. So bridging like that knowing into your daily life. And then you get a weekly group call with me where, you get direct support and guidance from me to figure out how to apply some of this to your life if you're feeling stuck. Or so much of the time, what we're working through in those group calls is like actually helping us get out of our heads and connect more to our bodies, because that's the way into our younger parts, into our nervous system, all of this kind of stored experience that we were just talking about. So the program, it's one of my favorite parts of the week is to go and sit with this amazing community. And there's an open community for people to connect that's private for folks who are in the group. So it's really, what I will say is it's amazing no matter where you are in your healing journey, because you can take different things from it if you're just starting out, versus if you're somebody who's been doing this for a while and you're looking to kind of deepen your work or continue staying connected to your younger parts or continue peeling back the layers, because it is never a one and done. But as we cultivate those inner capacities and that inner safety, more things are revealed to us, more depths of pain or layers of experience are revealed to us. So wherever you are, there's something for you in it, depending on what you need or where you want to go deeper.
I love that. I know I so needed that.
I mean, this program was born partly out of my training, but also heavily influenced by my own healing journey and what I pulled together and other amazing clinicians introduced me to that moved the needle for me. Yeah. There's so many modalities out there and they're wonderful. I think we actually all need different things at different times. It's not that one is a fit or better than the other. But to have someone have almost curated a very intentional integration of things that we know are really impactful, especially with early attachment, I would have loved to have that to me. So I yeah, I encourage anyone who is remotely interested or resonates with anything that we've talked about today to check it out.
And I also love that it's not, like a little 6-week program. It's 6 months, which is you're invested together. And we know that community is so important. So I'll leave the link to it in the show notes. Well, thank you for this conversation. We will have you back. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Monique. I'd love to be back.